Hello again. I'd like to share with you a few thoughts about what it means to embrace contemplative living. And with your permission, I would like to read from some of my notes because it's quite an in-depth subject and I only have 9.5 minutes. So would you please bear with me? According to the great Thomas Merton, whom I love dearly, and a lot of his books, he says this about contemplative living. Contemplation is the highest expression of man's intellectual and spiritual life. It is that life itself, fully awake, fully active, and fully aware that it is alive. It is spiritual wonder. Contemplative living is spontaneous awe at the sacredness of life, of just being. It is gratitude for life, for awareness, and for being. It is a vivid realization of the fact that life and being in us proceed from an invisible, transcendent, and infinitely abundant source. Contemplation is, above all, an awareness of the reality of that source. Contemplative living is a way of life that involves dialogue with the soul of self, with the soul of God. We purposefully engage in activities intended to deepen our relationship with ourselves, with God, others, and nature. We are conscious of how our decisions, actions, and use of time affect each of our relationships. We see our relationships are all interrelated and integrated, and see God in each of them, not separate. We take personal responsibility for each of our relationships. Our relationships determine our life's goals and become the measure of our success. We are not distracted by meaningless activity, and our active life does not suffocate our contemplative nature. We see through the illusion of separateness, acknowledge and amend whatever we do that alienates us from our true self, each other, nature, and God, and we recognize that we are already one. Our spiritual contemplative life becomes one with our active daily life. We regularly spend time in silent reflection, solitude, contemplative dialogue, and other contemplative practices. We find ourselves more concerned with the issues confronting humanity and less with the mundane concerns of daily life. We experience the freedom, the joy and love that can only come from grounding ourselves in our relationships. Now here is what works for me in this whole world of contemplative living. Contemplative living is living a life of unity. Unity in terms of living these 4 key relationships correctly and in harmony with each other. Living these relationships as a dynamic system rather than a linear process. This means that one can enter the system through any of the 4 relationships that each relationship is connected to and affects each other relationship. The most leveraged relationship in terms of its effect on all the relationships is with oneself. Thomas Merton refers to this process of dealing with the correctness of this relationship as awakening to the difference between one's true and one's false self. The true self being that part of us that is God-centered and driven by love, versus the false self which is ego-centered and driven by narcissism. The best way for me to grasp this truth is to realize that I am made in the image of God, not my parents, not Piccadilly Circus, not O'Connell Street, and certainly not Belfast. I attended, and not the clubs I may belong to. All of these ever-present forces in my life have influenced who I believed I was, my ego self, but not who I really am, thank God. Do you consider yourself a contemplative person? Would you say that you live contemplatively? Having asked these questions of hundreds of people, we find that most people do not see themselves as contemplatives or feel they are living contemplatively. Most define contemplative living as leading a less busy, quieter life or engaging in certain practices such as meditation, cantering, prayer or yoga. In the popular imagination, contemplative living is still influenced by the close connection between contemplation and monks and nuns who leave the world and live in monasteries. When asked, however, whether they had a desire or felt a need to live more contemplatively, 95% of those surveyed responded positively. This response may reflect a desire to escape the distressing and hectic pace of life, but it may also express a sincere desire for a closer relationship with God. Contemplation is about loving God. It is the way I speak with God. It is the way God speaks to me. It is a way of praying. It brings ultimate joy and peace to my heart and to my life. It is the most real phenomenon in my life. Contemplation is a way of life, as I explained. It's coming into that closer intimacy with divine oneness. It's allowing yourself to be yourself. And it's allowing you to offer to God your availability and your vulnerability, to be still in that all-knowing presence and enjoy companionship with God. I believe that contemplative living says something much simpler, that we are already one. We are one in God. We are one in His Spirit. And that implies that we are living a contemplative life with that knowledge that we are one in spirit, that we are already connected with God. So that when we make time to be still and reflect in the presence of God, when we seek God above self and all others, then something wonderful happens. And as I've said, we are already one, but we imagine that we are not. Why is that? And what we have to recover is our original unity. What we have to be is what we are. Thomas Merton got it right. A great man who offers us a clearer understanding and certainly a role model to follow in this modern world, like us who live the simple life in the footsteps of Francis in our monastery without walls.